we're here, and, you know, God tried to stop us, and he couldn't.
Yeah. Threw a little bit of weather our way and knocked out your internet. Did your power go out too?
It kept flickering on and off, but like it was stable maybe like 30 minutes after we gave up. So he was satisfied.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't necessarily God. It could have been, our good friends of the show, Dave and Dan and their government guys.
Yeah. Could have been seed in the clouds, which that's a crazy thing, by the way. Have you ever read about cloud seeding?
It's a real thing, right? Like it started out, people were like, oh, it's very suspicious, maybe, but then like actually they can do that. They can like start storms or something.
I think they use silver. I saw this on Jeopardy, so I don't know. Maybe Jeopardy's lying to me.
That's pretty reputable, There are worse sources than Jeopardy.
For real. Also, my garage flooded last night, so that was fun.
Whoa, holy shit. What happened?
So you know how like my garage has a big hill in front of it?
Yeah. It all kind of slopes down that way.
Yeah, so there's a drain down there, and like thank God for Kyle, because he noticed that it wasn't draining. And so we had to go out there in the rain and like dig out the dirt from the drain because it had gotten so clogged with leaves and dirt because it's been raining all week that it had filled up. And so it didn't get like into the garage. It was like right at the threshold. It was super close.
Whoa, it's fucking wild.
Yeah, it was nuts and not super fun to deal with. I didn't do a lot though, honestly. I tried and failed to open the garage door. I don't know why that's so hard for me. I ran around and handed Kyle stuff. I was very useless.
Yeah, I don't have like an opener, I guess.
It keeps breaking.
Okay.
So no.
You might need one in case you ever need to get in there.
I have noodle arms. So yeah, all that to say, this is going to be stitched together a bit. So if you ever hear a change in sound quality or just like, I don't know, Grady's voice takes a while to warm up. So that's because it's a new day. Yeah. So bear with us.
All right, here we go. Let's jump in.
We're back with part 2, and we're jumping right into Stalin's fingers, which is just a really unpleasant turn of phrase.
Jumping into Stalin's fingers?
I don't want that.
He's just softly caressing us in this next part.
No.
Maybe if it's hot Stalin, then yeah.
If it's young Stalin, then fine. His fingers they are welcome.
Should we give any... I mean, you're listening to part 2, so you were around for part 1, right?
If you weren't, you should probably go listen to it, or you'll be a little confused. But we're on chapter 5 of Blackshirts and Reds by Michael Parenti.
All right, in this chapter, Parenti kind of starts talking about the Gulag system and kind of like popular perceptions of that versus what the historic evidence shows. And in general, when you are talking about socialist states, states governed by communist parties, people, how they will be like, oh, this was terrible. This is a police state. It was the worst thing ever. And he's kind of like saying, well, how bad was it? And what were the conditions, sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say definitely take a listen back to our Stalin episode. Like my overall feel on this though is that like it's still bad for sure. We can absolutely and should absolutely still criticize it, but I think Parenti does a good job of pointing out like, let's take a look at who's making these claims and how our shit is going on in our own house when it comes to prison labor and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I when you say like, yeah, it definitely was bad, I think he also says that too.
For sure, sure.
He gets kind of a reputation as like, oh, I don't want to, talk to anybody who listens to Parenti because like he's a tanky or whatever. But like he says in there like, hey, some of the shit was bad, I
think he does. Yeah. I think it's just so hard to find nuance in this kind of stuff that not even defense, but any sort of nuance is treated as a defense.
Right. Yes. And I mean, come on, that happens in historical examples. It happens today. If you're like, hey, should we be sending tons and tons of money to arm Ukraine, or should we? Then they're like, oh, you're a tool of Putin. And it's like, no, that guy's an asshole. Like, I don't like him either.
Two people can be bad.
Yeah. Or like, hey, I wonder if what they're saying about China is as bad as what, the U.S., its avowed enemy, is saying. Like, is it really that bad, or is it somewhere in between? And that's like, well, you defend everything they say. And it's like, maybe not.
I'm just asking questions.
Well, yeah, and you don't want to be disingenuous with that and say like, because people on the right will do that too. So, oh, I'm just asking questions.
Yeah.
But any sort of criticism, I think, of the main U.S. imperial line is seen as like, oh, you're a paid agent of whatever. It's just stepping out of line. But let's get into what he says here in this chapter. He starts out kind of saying how it's interesting that while we were shown a very dystopian, I guess is the best way to put it, like view of communist nations and stuff, how they were just complete police states and horribly repressive, how they just kind of like fell with very little violence.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting point of like, yeah, look how intense and horrible these people are. And it's like, I mean, that's a super peaceful transition to power.
Yeah. Could you imagine the United States peacefully transferring power to a different type of regime?
Absolutely not. We can't even like vote people in anymore.
There would be like an honest debate about like, should we push the nuclear button before China takes over?
Yep.
And so he's like, well, okay, well, how repressive were they? Sort of how bad was this? And that's the first section talking about the victims. And I mean, he just like uses documents versus showing how other people are like just doing estimates and stuff and getting all the way up to 100 million people. And it's just like, how can you go from anywhere from, 5 to 7 million and then be escalating to, it's just like people are guessing.
For sure. What do you think about kind of his claim? He's like, why would the NKVD, their secret police lie about this? I'm like, I don't know. Secret polices like to lie about things. So what did you think about that?
I am fine with the view that they are under. The trouble with it is that, yeah, they probably don't have completely accurate records. They're kind of at a cross, like they're being torn in two different directions. So during the purges, they would have been pressured to purge more people. So the records would be like inflated, if anything. But then after the purges, they would be pressured not to be purging people. So they'd maybe go back and change them and make them lower or something. So
it averages out like, yeah, probably close.
Yeah. And then for your own internal records, you basically want those to be accurate. But then, when the 80s happened and they realized that their records are going to come out, like, do they have time on their way out the door to go back and say, actually, it was lower? Like, like it assumes that they know that their internal records of their country are going to be turned over to the general public, which doesn't seem like they would ever be operating under that assumption until like it's the very end and they're worried about like their country collapsing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, it makes sense logically that if they are an intelligence agency, like they would want to have the right information somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's completely off the books or something, which I think he does a good job of explaining that that's not really what the Gulag was. Like, it wasn't a black site. It wasn't like a secret torture camp or something, or an extermination camp. It was really just like, I mean, it was bad because it was their prison system, which prisons suck, but it was really basically just their prison system.
Yeah. That's a super common comparison is saying, well, Stalin is as bad as Hitler, and the gulags are used as an example of that. And it's like, all right, man, if you're that against gulags, are you also yelling about the prison system? Like, show up, buddy.
Yeah, and like, there are, comrades out there who would say, yes, like, I am, and that's great. And this is, where we're in solidarity while being in somewhat of a disagreement about, ends and means. If you are someone who's like, well, you have to have a prison system because of counter-revolutionaries, whatever. Okay, we can figure that stuff out.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bad faith people.
Yeah, but yeah, the liberals and the right-wingers who will do that. That's, where they're like, oh, well, no, we have prisons, and sure, we can try to improve conditions, but ours are different, but they have camps.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much of that is just the connotation of language, just having, a scary sounding word to Western ears. If they had just been like, yeah, they have prisons, this wouldn't be a conversation.
100%. Yeah. I mean, because over in countries that we don't like, they have, work camps. And I mean, you think our prisoners aren't doing work for basically free? There's an exception in our Constitution for slave labor, which is people convicted of crimes. And it's in the 13th Amendment.
Absolutely. And they get contracted out like crazy. Ugh.
But they're not in camps.
Not the same thing, apparently.
Yeah. One of the things he talks about is the executions of people during the time, basically during Stalin's time. I mean, Stalin's fingers, right? That's who we're talking about. The 33-year span had nearly 800,000 executions, 799,455. That's a lot of people. He said basically that these researchers who were looking at the records didn't get any breakdown, or didn't, it wasn't who all gets killed, but he was kind of talking about it these have a lot of people who were just executed for, murder or something, which boo the death penalty, but that's what that is. You also had people who had been collaborating with various enemies, right? So in the initial days, the foreign invasion, during the Civil War, or the White Guards, or the Nazis later. Some of them were German SS prisoners. And again, you can be well, you shouldn't execute people in general, but you also have to, I guess, keep in mind, it wasn't just, damn, this guy laughed at a joke about Stalin. So he it's not 799,000 people who were just
regular people.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a great defense, really, but it's context, maybe.
I think it is seen as when you think about the comparison to concentration camps, it's seen as just regular families getting swept up in this kind of thing, and just, whole villages or whatever. And this is more like a war count, which is still bad and I'm against it, but it is different.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up too, is it's not a category of people thing,
that too.
The Holocaust. Not to say there weren't, it just wasn't straight up executions, they did mass deportations of ethnic groups, which was not good.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of our
the strikes.
But that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about they line you up and shoot you, execute you. And they weren't doing that for, just, hey, this guy is, this particular ethnic group, blam. The next section was interesting, I thought, because he was talking about where, it's called Where Did the Gulag Go? And kind of why didn't we see more evidence of it?
Yeah, there would have been, if everyone's in a gulag, or not everyone, but huge numbers of people are in gulags, then after the fall of the Soviet Union, there should have been a giant release of people, all these horrifying stories, and, maybe refugees, and that didn't really materialize.
Right, yeah, and this, this government that took power there, he's going to get into it, was super anti-communist and everything. They would have taken the chance to say, hey, here are all the horror stories, here's the people we liberated, blah, 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 right?
That's a great point.
They didn't do that. They just more or less ran the prison system. Maybe they said, oh, these people were jailed for being anti-communist, so they're out. But they just kept running it. The Russian prison system is the inheritor of the old Soviet one. So it's not I don't know, that's the biggest, I guess, point of evidence of it was just a prison system, which, like it or hate it, it was kind of normal.
And then he talks a little bit about kind of the putting communists on trial. This, you can think of it as the, earlier we had denazification. This is their decommunistication. But it was kind of weak. All they could find were not very sexy cases. There was a guy, someone ordered the Czech police to use tear gas and water cannons against demonstrators. That happens every day.
Yeah, we need to put some American cops. Yeah.
Yeah, not a big deal. They could have borrowed some of our cops. They want some real nasty guys.
Yeah, for real.
12 elderly Stalin-era political policemen in 1996 in Poland were sent to prison for beating and mistreating prisoners. like 50 years ago. So these are, I mean, they're bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a fan of tear gas and beatings. But like, again, considering the levels of police violence prevalence in the States and in a lot of Western countries, like, this is pretty normal.
Yeah, and I think the telling thing is, again, there's a regime change. So you look at our system and you say, well, you know, your system has, you know, the United States has a lot of police violence and everything, and it doesn't get put on trial because the system is set up to protect them. But in their case, the system was set up to like show how bad they were, because it's it's a new set of leaders who have a real propaganda interest in saying, look at the bad predecessors, I'm new and good, you know?
Exactly. If there had been anything really, really nasty, we would have all heard about it.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's not to say like there weren't bad things, because obviously, like we keep saying, you know, just trying to reemphasize, I guess, but like it's if you have apparatus of police, you know, and prisons and all this going on, you know, that's going to cause some suffering. But it doesn't seem like it was, well, it certainly wasn't on like the scale of the Nazis or anything like that.
Yeah, and there's even like a story about someone releasing a bunch of prisoners because they're like just kind of assuming they were all there for political reasons. This was in Czechoslovakia in 1989. And they were criminals, and so they went and did crime.
Right. They had kind of a criminal history that they resumed upon leaving, instead of like, oh, I'm a repressed journalist or something.
Exactly. I mean, which is just kind of funny to me. Like, good job, prisoners. Way to go.
Showing them your skills. In this chapter, he also, I think, makes a sort of justification where he's kind of saying that, hey, you know, these states, maybe they did some bad things or things you disagree with or what have you, but they accomplished a lot. And they started out, the reason they accomplished so much is because they started out at like ground zero. You know, they started out below that, even like in terrible situations.
Yeah, I think this is what we talked about last week is, you know, when we talk about the Soviet Union and a lot of other nations that went through this kind of change, they were doing it because of their horrible circumstances and also in spite of, like, they, you know, that whole one arm tied behind their back kind of thing of like, this is a desperate situation, you know, we're fucking serfs, or in Cuba's case, we've been brutally colonized, you know, there's reasons why they're rising up, and the circumstances make things much more intense all around.
Yeah. And he kind of offers a critique of people who say, well, you know, you do all this and you're feeding the children and all this stuff, fine, but like you're taking away democratic freedoms and democratic rights and stuff like that. Leaving aside the whole, like, you do have like democracy within the party and stuff. You're not, you know, but you don't have like multi-party, you don't have liberal democracy, this sort of thing.
And his point was like, they didn't have that before.
Right. Yeah.
What democratic rights did the fucking czar give them?
Right. What has been taken away? You know, like,
I vote for the czar every year. It's just me sending him a sticker. It says like, you did it.
Good job.
Good job.
Good job, czar.
Stay in power for life.
But yeah, like he's saying nothing has been taken away, and how much has been given, you know?
Yes.
How much did, not given, but how much were the people able to do for themselves in overthrowing their imperialist masters, in overthrowing the ruling class, and governing for themselves, regardless of, you know, oh, you couldn't, you know, do counter-revolutionary stuff or you would be, you know, thrown in jail or what have you. Yeah, sure, but look at what all is happening for you. That's good.
Yeah, let's play bad Marxist here, though. How would this play out in a country that does have a liberal democracy? Like, this is stupid idea time. Let's give the people control of something really dumb, like, oh, but you get to vote on your sports team mascot.
So you keep like Congress and stuff, but it's just for
stupid shit.
It's just a popularity contest. Mm-hmm. I mean, some would say it's kind of for that now already.
It already
like the
is.
Stuff you can actually influence is actually just the stupid shit. The rest of it is stuff they already decided to do.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, that, I guess my actual point, besides the joke, was, this argument is they didn't have those rights before, nothing is getting taken away in a country where you, on the surface level, ostensibly had those rights. And there's a lot of caveats around that because, as we all know, voting is pretty fucked up here.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a harder game to play in the role of public perception. You'd have to make sure that what you're giving people is really fucking obvious and, like, noticeably better, which, at this point, it's probably not as hard to do because it's so bad. So, yeah, I'm holding out. Maybe climate collapse will get us there. We'll get so desperate. We're like, fuck these guys. And,
Maybe. I mean, I think that goes back to our earlier point, right? Is you make conditions bad enough to where people have to rise up, but then, I mean, they're starting in really bad conditions.
That's what I'm thinking. Good luck, grandchildren, when you're listening to this on a desiccated MacBook. Hi, your Grammy loves ya. Good luck out there. Don't get radiation poisoning. Okay, chapter 6. This is about, like, the fall of the Soviet Union and kind of the spread of free market shit everywhere, right?
Yeah. The fall of all of the socialist governments in Eastern Europe and the interesting notions of democracy, shall we say, that the new regimes had.
Yeah, one of my favorite points from this that I highlighted in my copy was, oh, by the way, I marked the fuck up out of your book, so
It is okay.
Enjoy that when you get this back. One of my favorite lines here was, apparently the free market, said by, quote, reformers to be the very foundation of political democracy, could not be introduced through democratic means. So, like, yeah, these people who are all yelling about democracy and fair elections and all that kind of shit, in order to get their regimes in place, do some backhanded, shady shit, some undemocratic shit to get their guys in power.
Yeah, they start getting rid of the communists as soon as they're in. They're just like, get out of here. You're not allowed in the political sector at all. Suspending parliaments, talking about the dangers of democracy, suppressing newspapers, all these things. In the U.S. all the while is like, oh, hey, they're like nice. On page 88, he talks about someone that he's going to kind of keep talking about throughout, I guess, or he has repeated mentions of this guy. The late not-so-great Mikhail Gorbachev.
My favorite tweet that I read about his passing was, how many of you all just realized he was still alive only to find out that he died? Because that was me.
Yeah, that was Abby, too. I told her about it. She was like, oh, he was still alive?
Exactly. Oh.
But he was very anti-democratic. Everyone, he's seen as, he's trying to be the liberalizer, the reformer, blah, blah, blah.
Loves Pizza Hut.
Loves hanging out with Reagan. Turns out he doesn't love democracy quite so much. What did he do?
Congress and him were fighting, and he kept cutting out microphones during a debate and threatened to abolish Congress by emergency decree, and then forced a vote 3 different times until he got to abolish it.
Wow. That sounds like someone who knows how democracy works.
For sure. I will strong on Congress into abolishing itself.
That's how you do it.
Sounds great. I mean, it does sound great a little bit. Current Congress.
But not the Soviet Congress.
Yeah.
He also talked about Yeltsin, everyone loves you, or someone loves you.
Someone still does.
Yeah, someone still loves you, Boris Yeltsin, but not these two commies. At least I think. I don't, at least.
I don't know anything about him, so I can't make that call yet. I just like the band.
What about what you read about here?
Oh, yeah, he did like a coup thing or something?
Yeah, he did. Well, he was the president of Russia. And when he gets in, he's kind of in a power conflict with like the old traditional hardliners, like the older communists that want to go back to that. He is essentially able to kind of solidify power when the hardliners launch a coup in August 1991, but it's like a real shitty coup. Like it basically just flops immediately.
Yeah, this coup was an op, right?
Okay. You can't find information that says it's an op. I guess because, it's good op. But
good op.
the way it reads on this page seems like that. But I haven't found any sources outside of really, pretty conspiratorial or like Russian generals saying that it, definitely was an op. So it could have just been doing really badly, so bad that people think that maybe you were an op, but it looks like one.
That's impressive.
But that allowed Yeltsin to get more power. But like, as he, this whole process, he's disbanding parliament and all its elected representatives. He's abolishing the courts, jailing people without charges, banning labor unions from politics, suppressing newspapers. I think it said in there that he was targeting like Pravda in particular, going after their like property and shit because they were the communist newspaper.
Yeah, he even disbanded like local governments, which I'm like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah. Yeah, he was just like, I'm in charge of this shit. He monopolized broadcast media. He outlawed a bunch of parties and scrapped the Constitution and like put in one that like gave him all the power, basically.
Yeah, in marked contrast to other constitutions in the Soviet era that were like popularly voted on and modified and ratified and all that shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, when we were doing the GDR episode, how they, did kind of popular referendums for amendments and things, and 90% of those got put into consideration and stuff. Like,
apparently that's not democracy, but this motherfucker is.
Yeah, the one that says, hey, the president gets to do it all. That's a democratic constitution.
Oh, so yeah, no, I do not still love Boris Yeltsin.
Yeah, he seems pretty bad. They even talk about him assassinating political opponents.
Oh, the journalist?
Yeah. There was a journalist. There were like independent and communist deputies who he had assassinated too.
Oh, he pocketed some money from our good friends, and by good friends I mean good enemies, the IMF and the World Bank.
Yeah, I mean, he just kind of mentions this, that he benefits from multi-million-dollar donations from and a $10 billion aid package. And I don't know if that just meant like, oh, people liked it because they got money and he claimed credit, or if he like really was stealing it or something. Like, he didn't really say.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't trust this fucker, so.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Page 91, he's in relation to that election. One of the things he went around saying was like, if the communists win, there's going to be civil war. I think at one point they said that he was behind in the polls and he was like planning to cancel the election because he was losing.
A normal democratic thing to do.
Yeah. And this is, again, the guy who the West was holding up as like the champion of free market reforms and liberalization and democracy and all that.
Yeah, in conservative or Western parlance, free market equals democracy, when in fact it is just like not. They're not related at all.
Yeah, again, we said earlier, like, they're talking about the dangers of democracy. They're saying like, oh, to do these reforms, we can't do the democracy part. It's
insane.
Like they're actually separate things. Oh, what did you think about the part where he said, hey, what if a popularly elected communist president in Russia had done this? They were just calling themselves communist, but they were doing all these things. And then he's like, well, I say they would probably let him do it. And he said, that's kind of what they're doing in China.
Oh, you mean they're doing all these things like free market shit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. That is, see China. Like, we don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, the U.S., increasingly in our time is, being more antagonistic and saying kind of like, oh, we don't like China now, they're bad. But like back when he's writing this, they were super cozy with China.
It's becomes a branding question, I guess. Like, if you're just calling yourself communist, but not actually doing communism.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've had discussions on the show how, like, China is more complicated than that. You can't just completely dismiss it. But, like, it happens to almost all the socialist states we look at that, like, you have to end up doing a little bit of market capitalism because we're still in that game, unfortunately.
Yeah. And, kind of the defense, there's obviously a defense, like you said, of, oh, maybe they have to do it or whatever to develop themselves to that point. I think he also calls out Vietnam as one example of this too. And I guess for him, he's just saying like, hey, that's not real. Like, that's not, well, what would he say? That's not actual socialism, or that's not, or they're doing a whole lot of capitalism in their socialism is what he's saying.
But I mean, it's one of those things where like, it's not like we're totally neutral on China and Vietnam. Like, we're not like best friends, you know?
Yeah. And I think he does kind of at some point say like, you know, at least they do have like a communist party in charge. So they're taking these steps now, but being at the helm of that, at least they have the chance to make sure that it's not like a full on, hey, let's bring back capitalism sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what he was saying a few chapters earlier, where it's about like kind of intent, and it's about like having communist values at the core of your society of like, yeah, we're going to take care of people. I mean, even like China, for all its problems, like we saw how they handled the virus way better than a lot of countries. Like they are together in that sense, you know, like they can like build a new city like nobody's fucking business, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So they can do some things. I'm not saying they're good at everything, but like they've got a handle on a few things.
Mm-hmm. I liked his calling out of a few U.S. financed agencies that people don't think about. The National Endowment for Democracy, which is like a self-admitted, they're like, hey, we work with the CIA. Like, I know we're called National Endowment for Democracy, but they're kind of upfront with it at least.
Not the same thing.
The AFL-CIO's Free Trade Union Institute, which, I mean, kind of sounds nice. That's like a union, you know, and...
It's got free trade in it, though.
Yeah, I guess so. But, I mean, AFL-CIO makes me think of, like, it's free and then Trade Union Institute. Like, we are the, you know, freedom, not like free trade together, but like the trade union part together.
Okay,
because they're a trade union, you know.
Yeah.
But good spot there. I think that's more aligned with with their
what
values.
They're actually doing.
I didn't know that was a group that was linked with the CIA. And this Free Congress Foundation also sounds nice. Okay,
That
Free
sounds good.
Congress. I mean, as long as you're not thinking the U.S. Congress, but but it's anti-communist, it's conservative and religious. Not good.
No, really not great. I have a question about the footnote on this page. I mean, this is less of a question, more of a request. I would love to do an episode on this situation in Ethiopia in 1995.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, so this is Mengistu Haile Mariam. Very sorry for pronunciation. I didn't Google this ahead of time. Now, apparently there was a socialist government in Ethiopia for a hot minute, so like we should probably find out about that.
Yeah, for sure.
We haven't done an African episode in a while. Another note about Africa was about South Yemen and Ethiopia. And they're talking about like the military actions that took place when they like were being just obliterated as communist nations.
Mm-hmm.
And my note is like, why don't we ever hear this? Like, this is the 90s. Why don't we ever hear about that context when we talk about like suffering in Africa? Particularly Ethiopia was often used in the 90s as like an example of a suffering African nation. And like, obviously there's like some white savior shit going into that, but like, why don't we get that context? Like, okay, why?
Yeah. It's not, there's never an explanation, because the explanation would be, this is like the ravaged frontier of capitalism.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, because we did it. We did the suffering.
Is just imperialism.
We caused it.
So we don't want to look at it as to its causes. We just say, well, that's sad. That's bad, you know.
Gross.
Yep.
Okay, what else? Oh, yeah, the elections in Estonia. 42% of the population was prohibited from voting because of their Russian, Ukrainian, or Belarusian antecedents. So, like, because of their background, like, ethnically?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Sorry, you can't.
That's what I call a free election.
Yeah, glad we brought democracy to them. And again, that's the theme of this chapter, I think, is democracy. It's a tool. Sometimes it works for capitalists, and so they're like, oh, we're all about democracy, you know, especially if they're criticizing socialist states. They're like, oh, they don't have democracy, so they're bad. We got to overthrow them. But as soon as it gets inconvenient, they will just like get rid of it. Goes on to talk about some elections where communists like just they won the elections, and all of a sudden there are these like CIA-backed protests to force them to resign.
We learned about some of these kinds of things in Open Veins too. Like, it's just weird how that always happens.
And then for some reason, out of the ashes of that come like anti-Semitic groups and neo-Nazi groups, and it's just it's like those are hand in hand or something.
Yeah, super weird. Quick note, I loved the magazine title that is cited, Covert Action Quarterly. How do I get on that subscription list?
You have to be in the know.
I gotta go ask Dave and Dan.
Yeah, that's what they're reading when they're out there.
It's kicked back with Covert Action Quarterly.
I like that he put a section in here just to talk shit about Václav Havel.
Oh, yeah. Who's this guy again?
So he's this like playwright from Czechoslovakia.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And he became like their first post-communist president or whatever. And he just makes fun of this dude for being a weirdo. He was talking about like how he wants to he apparently did like a weird op-ed where he was like, oh yeah, you've got like transcendental responsibility and all this weird shit. Kind of woo-woo. But then also was like, oh, weapons sales, that's not good, but actually did it. Like was just doing weapon sales.
Of course.
Suspended parliament, even though he's like, well, I'm the nice academic guy. I'm very, intelligent and gentle and civil, but no parliament, no thanks. I'm just going to rule by edict to do free market reforms.
Oh yeah, and this was the same guy who like released all those prisoners we talked about earlier too.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
this guy's just kind of inept.
He sounds like Mr. Bean or something for them.
He sounds like Trump if he was coming at it from the left or something.
Yeah, just like bumbling.
Like a woo-woo Trump.
Okay.
Like, what's that lady? Marianne.
See, I think she would be more competent than that. But yeah, Marianne Williamson.
Those vibes, not like necessarily her competency, but
yeah
those
vibes,
kind of woo-woo
sure.
vibes.
Yeah. What else did he do? Criminalized advocating communism. So he just outlawed us,
Yeah, he criminalized class hatred. Which, like, how do you even do that?
you have to like rich people.
Every time you see a rich person, you have to bow.
Yeah. And you have to be happy about that. Do it with a smile. He liquidated former communist and state properties at super cheap prices and just basically gave them away to business, similar to what we talked about in the GDR episode. That happened across, all the former socialist states. Just get like garage saled, basically, by the new government. I hated the part where he was talking about how they gave all this land back.
Oh, all the public land?
Yeah, the land that had been taken from the
aristocracy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and then he took a bunch of it too, because of course he did.
Yeah, his family had lost. And this is just all like, reverse of Mao's like, go after the landlords thing. Is just like, create new landlords.
Yeah, this is reverse land reform, which means it's my least favorite thing.
Yeah, it sucks.
Ugh. Okay, next section. Yeah, this section he talks about, I like this term, colonizing the East, and also recolonization, which is, I think, a really useful way to view like how these former Eastern Bloc states were treated. It's very much like Open Veins. They get into these really nasty trade agreements where they are not benefiting at all. Yeah,
and the recolonization thing is interesting because before, they become socialist states, so before World War II, they were oftentimes in that World War I, interwar, and World War II period, like parts of big empires, but like they were like the kind of colonial part of it. Like they were not the center of the
satellite states
or whatever. Yeah, the satellite states. That's a good. So it is kind of like recolonizing in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. Like they're being set up in these extractive situations, exploiting oil and natural gas and minerals. The IMF, once again, my note here just says, fuck the IMF, so I know I need to reread this paragraph. In 1996, they gave a $10.2 billion loan to Russia. Their terms, no big deal. Just privatize your agriculture and other state-owned assets. And, also get rid of any human service and fuel subsidies. Just, you don't need those, right?
That's obviously useless. I mean, throw that right out.
You have $10 billion.
Yeah, it's a mess all over the place. He talks about there, he talks about Macedonia, basically everywhere. And he does a lot on the GDR as well, or now I guess at that point, Eastern Germany, after reunification, how the privatization of that was really just this, similar to what we were talking about with Václav Havel. It's just a giveaway. I mean, it's just like, here you go. Here's all the shit. It's completely one-sided.
Well, what's interesting to me is how, like, it doesn't work. Like, you hear a lot, like, I remember, I mean, I was not as well informed back then, but like when Greece had those austerity measures, that's what this reminded me of all these kind of, these are austerity sorts of rules that come with these loans. And you'd think, you're like, okay, well, maybe logically you're like, I guess it's so they can get back on track, get their budget together. No, like it doesn't work. They're losing production. Let's see. Production of trucks went from 150K to 13K a year in Moscow in like one plant with 40% of the workforce laid off. How is that success? 40% lost in farm output in Hungary? Like, yeah, that's obviously not what we want.
Right. Yeah. He said Bulgaria was in that too, that, they used to be like the breadbasket of Eastern Europe, but then they have these big, huge shortages, inflation, because they're trying to pay back this debt that they've been saddled with, and so they have to do austerity. Yeah, you're right to bring up the Greek example. That was back in 2010, 2012, something like that. These sorts of things inflict a lot of pain. They make sure that the bankers are going to get their interest payments, but they don't serve the people because the system's not set up to serve people. It's set up to extract. And that's with anything in our system. You got to look at it in this kind of, you got to remove the glasses, basically. And he'll talk about this later on when he gets into a discussion of Marxism, but it's what is the real explanation here? And it's serving the ruling class.
Yeah, and if you want like a micro example, like think about fucking food prices and gas prices, like that isn't so, that is to line somebody's pockets. That's not because like, they're trying to be responsible or something.
Yeah. Because they'll say, oh, and costs and this, it's also hard. But like they're raking in record profits.
Yeah. Costs are up, but also for some reason profits are up. Explain that to me.
Anytime a society has to go through austerity or has to go through inflation or whatever, quote unquote, has to, and there has to be belt tightening and all this, who's tightening their belts? It's never these motherfuckers saying, well, I got to sell my 8th yacht. I got to, rent out spare rooms in my mansion. It's never that.
Nope.
Chapter 7, the free market paradise goes east 2.
Part 2. He says, I'm actually not done, but my page counts are off. I get it, man. I'm writing a book right now, and I always I have a little doc of like how long my chapters are.
Oh, is that a thing? They tell you like, hey, this chapter's too long, this chapter's too short.
I've never gotten that pushback, but I try to keep it between 10 to 20 pages a chapter. It's mostly for pacing because for me, at least, I do like full page chapter breaks. And so like it lets your eye rest a little bit, but you don't want those like right next to each other or like to go a really long time without it.
Okay.
I mean, that's just, I don't fucking know what I'm doing is also the secret. So who knows?
That's
Buy my book.
I figured there was some sort of expert way to do it, but I guess
nope,
it is sort of art. So
it's the worst. I hate it.
All right. So here is more of like the crimes of capitalism section where I
hate that too.
Yeah, he's like, hey, here's what happens when all this goes down. Not just the initial shock, but what does society look like after that? What does the free market bring to people? How does it improve people's lives? And the answer is it does not.
No, yeah. I'd love to get some updated numbers in some of this section. In Russia, the living standard of the average family had fallen by almost half since the market reforms took hold. That's in 1996. These similar things happening in Hungary and Vietnam. The suicide rate climbed by 50% in Russia and Hungary. Underpaying doctors and nurses. You have a rise in drug addiction. You have way worse conditions in hospitals and in terms of like rates of diseases. It's a marked drop in quality of life across the board.
Yeah. More crime, less healthcare, worse nutrition, more infant mortality, higher death rates, more homelessness, all this. At the beginning, his first section there called for vipers and bloodsuckers. Like, the juxtaposition of all this suffering for the many is that, on the other hand, you had this small group of people that was making just incredible amounts of money now. He had this quote from Bruce Gelb, the head of the United States Information Agency, who told this reporter, like, hey, basically, these guys need middlemen. He was like, the vipers, the bloodsuckers, the middlemen, that's what needs to be rehabilitated in the Soviet Union. That's what makes our kind of country click.
So what? You're saying bloodsuckers are a good thing?
Yeah, for this guy, and I mean that's why. I mean that's why you have right next to each other all these horrible conditions in society, all this degradation, everything going to shit, while these other people are piling up huge hordes of wealth.
What is the United States Information Agency? It sounds like a knockoff CIA.
It was a U.S. agency devoted to, quote, public diplomacy from 1953 to 1999. It was PR for the U.S. Its full-time professional staff of more than 10,000 spread out among some 150 countries, burnished America's image, and trashed the Soviet Union 2,500 hours a week with a Tower of Babel, but like pronounced or like spelled babbling, like babbling.
Okay.
Comprised of more than 70 languages to the tune of over $2 billion per year.
So they're professional shit talkers.
Yeah.
Which I guess that's good work if you can get it.
They were podcasters for the U.S. government.
Podcasters. That's very true.
All right, back to shit talking.
Yeah. Let's get back to our core competency.
Yes. So things looked really bad. I think that, so you want updated numbers. I think numbers did get better. Like, this was the initial shock. People figured out how to survive. It didn't keep going down. But I mean, I think it got way better and stayed better for those very wealthy, and then everyone else like leveled off. It got really worse, and then like they got a little better, but they were way further down the rungs.
Yeah, than they had been in previous, like, under socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mongolia too. That's one we didn't mention. Homeless kids and shit.
Yeah, living in the sewers there, which communism had really built up Mongolia into like a modern state. I mean, it hadn't had an education system, public works like that sewer system in Ulaanbaatar. Like it was a big, huge state-run project. We're talking 5-year plans, like full-on industrialization sort of thing that like modernize them,
Yeah, completely change the game, and then to have that pulled out from under you so suddenly, that's nuts.
I hated the sexism part here, where the Polish woman said to get a job now in the capitalist system, you must be young, childless, and have a big bosom.
I mean, I guess I got to go to work in Poland. That does suck though. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it sucks all around. People are working harder and for less money. There's sweatshop conditions. You go without pay for months.
The unions get broken up. There's less benefits overall. And overall, I guess there's growing inequality as a result of all this private investment coming in.
Yeah. This stat was interesting. In 1992, Russia saw its consumer spending drop by 38%. For comparison, during the Great Depression, the U.S. fell 21% over 4 years. So, like, that's so dramatic.
Yeah, that's a crazy figure. He also called out China here about the child labor issue. He was saying that market reforms had brought a return of child labor in certain areas, I guess. It's like, damn, that sucks.
It super sucks. We're generally against that. Oh, but, you know who is doing well in this? Security forces and private armies. For some reason, when you get more capitalism, you get more of those. Weird.
Usually I find that people who are trying to rob me in the streets are generally more effective when they're armed.
That is how you do it.
And people who hold people in slavery, they're generally, have fewer people escaping if they're well armed and policing them and everything. So
exactly.
maybe it's like if you're oppressing people, you have to have like a gun to their head.
Let's talk corruption.
This part was just like, you remember they used to have something on the radio that was like dumb criminal of the day or something?
Yeah. What was that called? And I remember the theme song from it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember what you're talking about. Anyway.
This, I don't know, for some reason that read like this to me just because like it should be embarrassing to these people, like how brazen they were.
Yeah,
but I'm sure they're not actually embarrassed about it.
I'm sure they didn't get in trouble for it, so.
No, yeah.
And this section is really in contrast with, how communist countries are characterized as corrupt. Like, let's take a look at what happened after communism.
Yeah, like the April 1992 example I thought was hilarious and sad, that the chairman of Russia's central bank admitted that at least $20 billion had been illegally taken out of the country and deposited in Western banks. Like,
that's just so much money.
20 billion, I don't know where that is. It's gone.
Oh my God. Moscow City Council member admitted to hundreds of billions of dollars in corruption, or estimated. So, we don't actually know. Could be more, could be less.
Yeah. That was the real estate scam, basically, that they were doing of like kickbacks and like selling real estate for really cheaply and then reselling them. Like you would sell it to your friend real cheaply, then they would resell it at market price and make a ton of money and give you some of it. And that was the scheme. I mean, like anyone could come up with that. That's like a regular ass scheme that just a stupid person would come up with, and that's what they were doing openly, basically, and getting away with.
Yeah. Oh, and organized crime skyrocketing, like the Russian mob basically coming into existence.
Yeah, these guys ran rampant. Like, just started doing contract murders, just started, taking over the place.
Again, I love the note about the fact that there were fewer police people under communism. You think of communism as totalitarianism. Everyone's after you. It's a fucking security state. Nope. Guess which one is.
Again, it's funny how it seems like you need more force to force people to turn over to you all their money and all of the time in their life. Years of their life given away to making you rich. You have to have guns for that. But if the people are working for themselves and for their society, not so much.
The cultural decay section was also depressing.
Yeah.
One stat that I thought was interesting was that during, the communist era, 3 of every 5 books in the world were produced in the Soviet Union because of rising prices of books and paper and everything. Like, that is just so not the case anymore.
Yeah, and it's in stark contrast to the popular conception of, these guys had nothing. They had no books to read. The government approved everything. It's like, no, they had a lot of books and stuff, and then the capitalists came in and banned them. And
like diverse books too. They're talking about they had books from Latin America and like other continents, and like now they mostly get like shitty mass market stuff from the West. Like the West has dominated their markets.
They get a bunch of airport books, which enjoy them. That's
I
fine,
do love an airport book. I'm not gonna lie. They buried 50,000 tons of books in a dump for like Marxist associations, I guess.
That is a lot of books.
That's so many. Tons. Yeah, that's not like 50,000 books.
50,000 books.
50,000 tons of books.
That's crazy. Education. Let's just wall that off. Only rich people need to get that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the media gets privatized and made into, corporate media, pro-capitalist media and everything, pumping out propaganda.
And then the next section talking about some of the more vulnerable groups, women and children, especially in this time. Huge increase in gender inequality. We mentioned this before too. 90% of women had jobs in a full employment economy, and now they're only 2/3 of the unemployed. No, they are 2/3 of the unemployed, not only.
Yeah. Like 90% to 33%.
Yeah.
And in low pay positions versus in like, in sort of parity of position like they had before. Now it's like, yeah, you have a job, but it's a shitty one.
Yeah, you lost all your like maternity leave and childcare services. Like, it's just making it impossible.
Not to mention just even the outright political representation in Congress and everything too, or their legislatures that used to be like guaranteed. Like you would have a certain number of representatives in your Congresses and stuff, and that was done away with too.
Sharp increase in women being murdered. Again, like these are the deaths of capitalism. These are the deaths we don't count when we talk about deaths under communism versus death under capitalism. Like we have to count these too.
Mm-hmm. School lunches too. That was provided for. Summer camps, youth programs, and everything. He says basically those get eliminated. Youth crime goes up. Social problems all around.
For sure.
And of course, people kind of had regrets about that once they saw what actually happened. This last little part of the chapter, he talks about people basically not realizing that they were going to end up with all this.
Yeah. The quote from this woman he talked to in a market, or that someone else talked to in a market, excuse me. Let's see, she was 58 years old and had worked 40 years in a potato factory and could now not afford most of the foods in the market. And her quote is, "It's not life, it's just existence."
I like the next quote too, where the chief of a hospital department in Moscow said, "Life was different 2 years ago. I was a human being. Now he has to chauffeur people around for extra income." When asked, "What about the new freedoms?" he said, "Freedom for what? Freedom to buy a pornographic magazine?"
I mean, exactly. They give us the freedom to buy little hits of dopamine, and that's it.
Yeah. He's like, what is the real thing? Like, I am, like, he basically said, I feel less human now.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
Which that's what it, and we're walking around in it. I mean, obviously bribed by like the creature comforts, the super, the stuff made possible by super exploitation elsewhere. So we don't have it that bad. We're not in a sweatshop, but like we do have those dehumanizing elements still.
For sure. I think all of us have felt that way too, of just like, that feeling you get when it's the weekend and you're like, fuck, I have so much just basic life shit to take care of. Like, I'm not going to get to chill at all.
So that I can go back and do it again.
Yeah. It just feels endless.
Yeah, for real.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the popular appeal or unappeal of this new system. Okay, in 1993, Russia showed only 27% of all respondents supported a market economy. In Poland, 92% wanted to keep the state welfare system. Contrasting this public opinion, again, democracy, with what's actually going on here. Like, the people don't want this. And so you'd think, okay, why? Why wouldn't they just, elect a communist and get out of here? Like, that's really hard to do, as we have seen.
Yeah, because, and he gets into this and he says, yes, some communists have been, elected again back to leadership at the local, even the national level. You can have a few communists in office, but communism or socialism, running a socialist state, is beyond just having a little bit of representation or even having a majority of the government. It's about taking power of the entire society. And in their situation, while you had a few communists there, capitalists were in control of society. They're in control of the means of production, property relations, the media, the police, the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you think his argument is that you just cannot vote your way to communism?
I think that he would probably say yes, but it's not necessarily just that, because you could theoretically elect, an entire or a mostly slate of communists, and then they could start doing that. But you have to start doing the things, which is actually seize control of the state, smash the old system, bring in your system, or else you're just nibbling at the edges. And if capital's really in control and you don't expropriate them, you don't take away their control of the economy, of the force of the government, of the institutions, if you don't take that out of their hands, they're just going to counter-revolution you immediately.
Even if we elected a whole Senate and House of Bernie Sanderses, it wouldn't do anything.
Yeah, because, you still have the military there. Because you still have, the police state. You still have the intelligence agencies. You
still have those private armies from, just companies.
Yeah, because you've got all the defense contractors. You've got all the big tech companies who are working with them. You've got all the banks against you that are all of a sudden not lending to the government.
They could just shut it down and be like, Amazon's holding your government hostage unless you pass these pro-business reforms. Bye.
It's called a capital strike.
The one strike I don't like.
Well, yeah. Or
besides police
strike.
strikes, yeah. Oh, I like this section. I mean, I don't like it, the results, but I thought this was interesting. We kind of talked about how, that's such a sharp decline. It seems to have leveled out a little bit, but he's talking about how, it's often these reforms, these free market reforms are sold as like, oh yeah, it's going to be temporarily hard, but like you're going to improve, you're going to get more capital. But he's saying, a lot of nations get stuck in that kind of temporary setback stage for centuries. And his example is Latin America. And I'm like, for fucking real. Like, you can't sell that as, oh, this is actually good for you in the long run. Because again, you have to ask, who is it good for? Like, this money isn't going to the people that live there. It's going to multinational corporations.
Yeah, because the economy is set up with the rules of the game being do anything you can to make as much profit as you can. And maybe, this is nice little Europe, so of course they're going to set up some regulations or something eventually. But it's still not in service to you. Like in our situation, we were just talking about how like, yeah, all right, the American working class has all these benefits and stuff that it gets compared to the global South. But that's like, we're still not the point of society, like of capitalist society. We're like, our well-being, they don't fucking care. They want us.
We're not at the center of their government the way we would be in communism, where their thing is let's provide for people. Theirs is let's provide for profit.
Yes, that's the key difference. In every one of these socialist states that got overthrown, that was the center of their economy, of their society, was how can we like provide for people? And yes, it wasn't always efficient. We had an entire chapter on that, but like that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, but when you take away that core ethos and replace it with profit, bad things happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, sure, in their case, in some of these Eastern European countries and everything, things did get better eventually, But like you said, it doesn't always work that way, and it's not even intended to work that way. Like it works that way if it's convenient for the capitalists, if it gets if it gets more of their population going into to work every day without doing rebellions and stuff. But if they don't need to do that, they're not going to, because that's not the point. The point is to make profit. So overall, I don't know, this chapter, to me, the big question I was thinking of was like that's a Shakespeare quote, right? The one that's like, is it better to have loved and lost?
That's Shakespeare. That's old Willie.
We're kind of in this. We're in the never have loved section. We've never had a socialist state, but it feels to me almost more tragic to have had one in your historical memory, at least, or maybe even in your personal memory if you're older, and then to have that torn away.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of experiencing the other side of that, which is, I mean, we were talking to our parents the other day about like kind of their financial issues growing up and, when they were young adults and stuff. And just like how much more accessible it seemed back then, like, wow, you guys like were able to buy a house and like do shit. But neither of you went to college. And like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Like we're experiencing have never loved, but also like never had a chance to.
We're declining from that, I guess. So it's getting even worse, and we're sadly like looking back like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. Like the 80s or whatever, and the 90s, where you could foreseeably have a family and provide for them. Like that is more and more just impossible to reach for most people.
One reason why conditions were so beneficial to regular people to where they could do that is because you did have to keep people pleased enough with your system in comparison to the viable alternative that was still around at the time, the Soviet Union.
That's what I was thinking about too. Like, yeah, it was very clearly, a buy-off, which like, sure, I'll fucking take it, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it made the world better by just existing, like it forced them to provide us things. And, you can see that throughout the 30s through the 80s was all just like, fuck, okay, don't kill us. Here's some workers' rights. Okay, don't kill us. Here's some, Medicare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the only time we get any concessions from a capitalist government is when they're afraid.
And now they're just systematically just taking those apart.
No fear.
Cool. Anyway, this is also a cheery chapter title, The End of Marxism.
Big if true.
Big if true. Okay, what do we got here? I mean, I wrote a quick review of Marx.
Yeah, kind of. A little explanatory section talking about Marxism as a social science, a way to conceptualize the world and better understand the patterns of it through class power, through political economy.
And, throwing shade at people who are like, yeah, this is just old shit. It doesn't apply anymore, which wow, he could have written this yesterday.
Yes, yeah, people are still out there doing this.
If you want to hit tweet, just hate on Marx.
Yeah, for real. There's still all these different criticisms of it, and he gets into them, I don't know. I thought this was a basic but very accessible understanding of how does Marxism analyze, how does it see capitalism for what it truly is?
Yeah, I would actually say if you haven't or don't want to read the Communist Manifesto, I would still suggest you do. But if you want to avoid some of the confusing vocab, this chapter might be good for you. He doesn't use any of the weird terms of proletariats and bourgeoisie and the terms that you have to Google. It's this is about production. People need to survive. Very basic shit.
It's very teachable, or I guess you can learn from it very well.
I feel like I could show this to a middle schooler and they would get it.
No, they would not. Maybe a high schooler.
Oh, okay, never mind. I forgot you teach those. Okay, high schoolers.
This is beyond most of their capabilities. You'd get a few.
I particularly like the paragraph, capitalist theorists present capital as a creative providential force. So, you hear about we're creating jobs, we're creating capital, we're the ones making things. In their view, it is the productive force. But Marxists turn that around and say all right, capital does not make anything. The labor makes the things.
Yes. Labor created capital. That's how it came to be. Human labor is the true job creator, and what we produce gets stolen by the capitalists and made into a big pile, and that's the capital that they're saying creates jobs.
Yeah. Another flip I really appreciated is the next paragraph, tackling the classic trickle-down economic theory. Rich people get richer, but don't worry, because they're going to spend their money in the economy and give you jobs and blah, 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 so we'll all get richer. But really, it's more of a cause and effect in the other direction of because there are rich people, there have to be poor people.
Yes. And the rich people got that way by making people poor, by saying, you're going to make this for me, and I'm only going to pay you this.
Maybe it's not even as direct. I would add maybe a third class of ultra poverty too, because then in turn, because you can still have a middle class in that, I guess.
Yeah. So some people, it's you're going to work for me. You don't have a choice. You're going to make less than what you're really actually worth here. And I get to pocket that extra money and buy a big house. And why do you agree to do that? Is because you don't have an alternative, except you kind of do. There is one alternative that's kept publicly displayed in your society. The people without houses, people living in the streets, the underclass that is kicked around. Oh, what did you think about this? On 124, he makes the point about professional athletes.
Oh, I thought this was interesting because, this is, I think, a common... I think this is a fascinating thing because, a surprisingly strikeable area in the United States, at least, is sports. And people get really mad about it because they're paid so much. Why are they striking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they're actually well unionized and everything. But I think he makes a good point. I think I agree with him.
I think so, too.
Because he says professional athletes who receive dramatically higher salaries than most people, but compared to the enormous wealth they produce for their owners, and taking into account the rigors and relative brevity of their careers, the injuries sustained, the lack of lifelong benefits, it can be said that they are exploited at a far higher rate than most workers.
Yeah, people out there getting horrible concussions and possibly lifelong ruining their health, that's intense, dude. You should get paid a lot for that. And that reminds me of the people who go into an art museum and be like, I can do that. It's well, you can't, you didn't. So shut the fuck up,
Yeah.
This also reminds me, I saw a great sign. It was Dallas Morning News did a coverage of the airline strike happening right now. And I think this is just the perfect sign to put on your striking signs are you mad at American Airlines? We are too. Because particularly right now, travel is really shitty and hectic. And like, yeah, there are a lot of, pilots and other people in the airline industry striking. And the public tends to turn on them and say like, well, this is inconvenient for me. Why are they doing this? This is shitty. Like, they're just taking a holiday. But like, if you can flip that around and say like, well, if they're mad at the airline, like you are also mad at the airline because they're the reason they're out there striking.
Yeah. And those inconveniences for you as a traveler are also inconvenient for the staff. I mean, these are people who have to take multiple flights a day just for their job and stuff. And like, when that stuff gets delayed, their plans, like their life is changed by that too. Like they have to do a different thing. They have to follow a different schedule, almost, 9 times out of 10 less convenient than what they were planning on. I mean, it sucks for them too. And it's the same thing with any strike of a public facing
teacher strikes.
Yes.
Those are spicy.
That's what I was actually going to draw the parallel to is people will get out and say, oh, you're doing this, you're bad because, you should be focused on the kids. My kids can't go to school. It's like, well,
I would love to focus on the kids if I had fucking time and energy and money to do so.
Yeah, there's someone who could solve this today. It's like my boss, Like,
yeah.
The state or, in different places, different things. They're like the school district, the state, whatever. They could fix this. It's not me. I'm not setting the policy. I have to follow it. It's another instance of like, we are on your side. It's just, we have to realize that. And this chapter is all about kind of like cutting through the bullshit that you're fed and seeing whose side are you on.
What's this crazy word? Gemeinschaft.
Where the heck is that?
124.
124. I just blocked it out.
You skipped right over it. Don't know it. I think it's like Gestalt.
Oh, so it's German.
It looks hella German.
It's got to be like kind of like a Gestalt or like a Zeitgeist sort of thing of like
integration.
It's just social relations between individuals based on close personal and family ties, community.
Okay, so he gave the definition right there. Okay.
Yeah.
Whoops.
So he was just saying community.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know. I mean, I guess because he's talking about Marx that he wants to, say, I also know some German. Here it is.
Check this out, guys. I took a semester of German.
But I did think that was a good little section, is that like capitalism is atomizing, is commercializing everything about our community. And just, he says, no system in history has been more relentless in battering down ancient and fragile cultures, pulverizing centuries-old practices in a matter of years, devouring the resources of whole regions, and standardizing the varieties of human experience.
That's extremely true.
We all feel that. Like, wherever you are, you feel that. If you're in a colonized country, you feel it so directly that your country has been cut open and bled, right? But even if you're in the imperial heartland, you see it when every town you visit looks the same.
Even every country. Like, I was kind of taken by that. Like, there's, was still McDonald's everywhere I went in Europe. Oh, you heard my great rant about the Louvre.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a fucking mall around it for some reason.
Yeah. It's just, what do you have to blame for that? You have, hey, let's set up the world for profit instead of for what would be desirable for humans, which is some variety and some culture and some community.
Okay. What the fuck is chiliastic? Chiliastic. I'm chiliastic.
Yeah, it sounded kind of chill. I don't know.
That's like you're excited about chilling.
Yeah, I think it meant like cold or like calculating or, that's what I assumed. Let's do another lookup, though. We're not that smart.
We're learning some words today, y'all.
Oh, millenarian. Okay.
What does that mean? Now I have to do another Google.
No, millenarian is like the end is coming. Like there's a big change about to happen.
Okay, gotcha. Well, anyway, why are we talking about chiliastics?
So here he's kind of defending Marx directly, and saying, well, here's some shit that fucking Marx figured out and people don't give him credit for. And so first up is business cycles and the tendency toward recession. He's like, that wasn't a thing. People weren't talking about that before Marx. He says, hey, every once in a while, the capitalists, their machine fucks up because it's designed to, and they have to throw millions of people out of work. They have to just, do what free market economists will call creative destruction. Just liquidate the place, ruin people's lives so that they can put profits back on course.
Yeah, I mean, the job creators end up being job destroyers.
Yeah, yeah. And they planned for it, you know. He's describing this as like the basic mechanism that it's like capitalists aren't really being personally greedy, although he gets into that later, but he's saying like there's a problem that they are required to cut costs, and this undercuts the demand for their products because their workers can't buy them, and bam, recession.
And that was a big deal because they hadn't, like, I guess, codified that recession boom bust cycle, or is it that they hadn't done it so much then yet?
No, I mean, they had been happening a few times, not as... Okay, frequently. So this is another big theory thing, but they seem to happen in greater and greater intensity as global capitalism or the subsequent, like, oh, this is big stuff, this is Giovanni Arrighi. But basically the economic cycles, as like it went from like the Dutch to the British to us in terms of world domination, the intensity of global recessions, setbacks, and stuff have increased, basically.
I mean, that makes sense because before you were working with a more local economy where like if you dropped some and that sucked. But like as you get a global economy, like there's more money in the pot.
Yes. Yeah.
That was my little summary.
That's a better way to put it. If you want to read like 500 pages on it, you can read Arrighi. I'm trying to work on it. It's complicated.
Okay. Let's see. Next, capital concentration. I mean, saying like, yeah, he predicted all these mergers as capitalism just consolidates more and more. My note was hold my beer because fuck, we're doing that for sure.
Oh, yeah. And it was, again, at a time before this was really happening. I mean, you saw like very small instances of it that he managed to predict when no one else did. Next, you had the growth of the proletariat. More and more people getting thrown down into the proletariat class from a more advantaged position. I thought this tied in well to our little article about remote work being surveilled and stuff. It's an instance of more people realizing, damn, I'm really in the working class now. I'm getting watched like an Amazon worker, you know?
Yeah, good point. Revolution also predicted that.
And this is the one where he's like, okay, well...
It didn't work.
Yeah.
At least not the way he thought it would.
And well, yeah, because he thought that this was going to happen in the most developed portions of capitalism. So he thought this was happening in Germany mainly, or in these places where capitalism was furthest along, where it had strengthens its position, versus where it actually happens, where it's mostly in imperialism's weakest links in Russia and China and Cuba and Vietnam.
The most oppressed people are the ones that rise up first.
Yeah, and the places where the empire is farthest flung, you know? So that one's more of like a right but not right sort of thing.
Yeah, right idea, wrong application. I thought this bit was interesting, talking about the Census Bureau. So he gives us a stat about, income inequality being like 14,000 to 1 in terms of like between the richest and poorest people, right? But the footnote talks about how the Census Bureau didn't give his research assistant any more detail because supposedly their computer can't handle like higher amounts, which like, what the fuck kind of abacus are you using?
Yeah, they still have like the punch card computers.
Yeah, like what is going on? But it doesn't make sense because they have also raised the upper limit. So like they have to know on some level, but they also said it was due to confidentiality because like otherwise you could figure out probably like where those rich people are, which like, I'd love to know that information.
Yeah, we should figure that out.
Dave and Dan, if you have any leads, let us know. But yeah, basically because of the way their numbers are set up, their system, you can lump in like upper middle class people who make like 70,000 a year and categorize them as the richest, which like that is not the richest, guys. That's a nice amount to make, but it's not the richest.
All right, it's 132,000 now. Okay,
so that's a good chunk of change.
Yeah,
I wouldn't sneeze at that.
Yeah. No, I mean this is a rich person, but like not like a corporate titan.
It's not CEO money.
Yeah, that's what we mean.
Oh, I thought this note was interesting too. That contract labor is increasing, and like, man, it so fucking has now, huh?
Mm-hmm, that took
Everyone's
off.
A freelancer.
That took off for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes a convenient way to say, hey, I don't have to like get you insurance or anything because this is just, that's you, man. That's you're working for yourself.
You can't really do a union. Can't do any of that.
You are a boss, actually. You're a boss. And
Congratulations, you're a boss.
you're on our side now.
We're going to take all your money, though. All right, next, a holistic science.
Dude, I like this section. He's talking about Marxism as like a way to kind of peek behind the curtain. Like it's revelatory. It makes sense of the world.
Yeah. It's a systemic way to look at things. Like, I don't know, not to be woo-woo about it, but it is a new way to view the world.
Yeah. You're putting on the glasses from They Live and seeing like, oh, actually, this is what reality is.
Yeah. You have to strip away, because, we are presented with a capitalist ideology if you live in a capitalist country. And so you're raised with those values, you're raised with these myths that we try to break down on this show. But when you start reading and understanding Marxism and this kind of stuff, you're able to start stripping away those pieces and like really look at them like we've been doing this book of like, all right, are they job creators? Are they, for democracy? Are they for whatever? Like you can start actually analyzing that.
Yeah. And he makes explicit what we kind of mentioned before is he says, Marx realized that what capitalism claims to be and what it actually is are two different things. The ultimate purpose of work is not to perform services for consumers or sustain life and society, but to make more and more money for the investor, irrespective of the human and environmental costs. And another thing he kind of focuses on in this chapter is the interrelated interconnectedness of everything in capitalism in our society overall.
Yeah. I mean, he brings in race kind of finally. He hadn't done that too much throughout the book.
Yeah. He has a really good example of racism as you can have like a kind of uninformed understanding of it at first. It's like, oh, well, it's just like people having a set of bad attitudes.
That is the base level understanding of it. That's kind of what we're taught what racism is. But when he he uses the term rational and he explains like, I don't mean like it's cool to be racist. I mean, in a capitalist system, it makes sense to incite race tensions.
Yeah, that's what, he's saying that it's not an irrational output of a basically rational and benign system. Like, hey, everything's set up, it works well. But we do have like a few weirdos who are like racists and, that's bad, but like few bad apples, right? But actually it is a rational output of a basically irrational, unjust system. Your system sucks and it makes sense that it's going to not just produce racists, but like encourage racists and like set up systems that are systemically racist.
Like slavery and the police.
Yeah. So when he's saying, you're right, when he's saying rational, it's not like good. He's saying like it makes sense given this system. And so he is, talking about those institutions, he says like Marxism allows you to not view them as like part of the natural landscape, that they've always been there, always will be there. And also as not neutral. This is obvious to a lot of people in some way, but Marxism gives you like the understanding like these people are working for a class, the class that funds them.
Yeah. I mean, think about any sort of scientific study. You like kind of always have to check who funded that because wowza, you can find a conflicting study pretty easily if you know that.
Yep. And all these, all the budgets of these institutions are funded by the capitalist class. All the politicians are how do they, because they draw a salary. Congress draws a salary. They draw us, what are they paid now? Do you know?
No.
Let's see. U.S.
No, I don't want to get mad.
Congress.
I know they don't fucking work most of the year.
All right. Per annum, $174,000. So they are,
wow,
paid pretty well. That's Congress. And then senator's salary, $193,000 for a senator.
Damn.
All right. So they're getting paid
pretty well.
But so many times they waltz into their, a millionaire probably, and waltz out with many millions more.
They give him metal detectors, and in DC, there's a bunch of just like secret treasure. That's what they don't tell you.
They go treasure hunt. I mean, they have the time. They don't have to be at work very often, but
for real.
Yeah, they work for the people who get them those extra millions. They don't work for you, and Marxism shows you that these connections and stuff aren't conspiracies. They're just class interests. institutions are set up this way, and overall, like you were saying earlier, we have myths that we're told versus what Marxism kind of peels back and shows you is the case. So like we have myths that, oh, hey, we have interdependency between us and other nations. We don't have imperialism. Or Marxism's not actually, it's just imperialism, We have common values as a society. There's no class domination, but Marxism's like, actually, it's just about class domination. That's all it is. We have pluralism. We have lots of different political actors and stuff. And Marxism's like, actually, it's a Byzantine bureaucracy.
The same guy.
Yeah, it's just set up to be confusing, to be bad, and not work for you. Or we have, I think this is interesting. We are told that, we do civic education, we teach citizenship, this sort of thing. But other countries, they do propaganda. And Marxism is like, why is that why are they doing propaganda? You are doing the same thing,
Yeah, and not even well. Like, I don't think I could pass a citizenship test.
Yeah, that's true. We mostly focus on the part about loving your country. That's the main. Yeah. That's the important thing.
Yeah. Again, there was a question on Jeopardy. There's a whole section on the Electoral College, and I bombed it, every single one of them. I was like, oh, fucking no.
Yeah, no, they're less interested in that because, like, who cares if you want to go vote or not?
Learning to ask why. Why are we asking why?
Well, I think he has a pretty good example of the world seeming confusing and random if you don't understand the relationships between things. Devoid of a framework that explains why things happen, we're left to see the world, as do mainstream media pundits, as a flow of events, a scatter of particular developments and personalities unrelated to a larger set of social relations. It's just a sea of random stuff, right, if you don't understand the connections.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely felt this way before. Like, you ever feel like the news just comes too fast, and you're just like, wow, we just had, Uvalde. Wow, we just had Roe. Okay, now we're having fucking floods in Pakistan. Like, it just feels like overwhelming. And you can just say, like, it sure is crazy out there. Or you could step back and be like, oh, I think, like, some of these things are connected.
Yeah, that's one of the powers of Marxism is it's explanatory in this way. And it gives the good example of the child labor story in Indonesia. And how, it's a shocking story. The mainstream media, these, the corporate media or whatever would carry just the story that says, damn, there was child labor in Indonesia and multinational corporations are using it. Then if you were to go and analyze it further and say, hey, this was backed up by Indonesia's military government, you might see fewer of those media outlets publish that. And then if you say, also the U.S. has been financing and advising and training this military for 30 years, which is true. You're going to get fewer outlets that produce that. Then if you go, hey, this isn't just Indonesia. If you zoom out and say, whoa, it's all class. It's all like us trying to make the world safe for the free market, for profit, for capitalism. When you start saying that,
then you're crazy.
Yeah. Then all of a sudden you're conspiratorial, nut, and only the diehard Marxist journals are going to publish that.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. And usually you can get people to that first or second level of like, yeah, this is weird, right? But like, it takes a lot to then connect it to the theory, which is, why sometimes we're like, well, maybe you don't have to bring up the theory.
Yeah. You can leave out the theory. You don't want to be like, he talks about the Marxist theorists who have, kind of retreated into abstract weirdo stuff. He had the quote about, what was it? How many Marxists can dance on the head of a surplus value?
I love that.
The one quote that I liked in this that kind of ties it all together. He says, Marxism offers the kind of subversive truths that cause fear and trembling among the high and mighty, those who live atop a mountain of lies.
Very good.
I'm like, yes, I do want to make them afraid.
I would love that. Okay, last chapter.
Anything but class, avoiding the C word.
Let's do it, cunts.
This was another chapter that I really liked because it's trying to dispel some of the myths that we are taught about class, and it also is calling out people who try to avoid it.
Yeah, there is a big discomfort in particularly this country around talking about money and especially class. Like, you're supposed to pretend it doesn't exist. I think, though, my response to this was like, this was hard for me to tell because I am so fucking left, but like, I feel like a lot of people are seeing it a little more clearly now. Maybe they don't have the word class, but they know stuff is rigged, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they know that like rich people are in charge, right?
I think that that's the case for lots of people. I would say it's a more prevalent view, it seems like, with younger or with more working class people too.
Yeah, I think I just hang out with too many youths.
The higher up you go in terms of income, even if they're working still for a wage, the more class denialism I think you'll see.
Yeah, or even like defense of that class of like, well, you know, they still donate or whatever.
Right, yeah, and you have experience with that too. Parenti kind of gets into it here, talking about, you know, how people try to avoid class, how the ruling class basically hates, you know, talking about class as an existence, and kind of calls it, you know, conspiratorial if you start talking about, you know, a ruling class controlling things.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about it, you do sound kind of crazy. You're like, oh, you know, we always have to give the what I call the mustache twirling addendum of like, yeah, they're not doing this on purpose. They're not like, wahaha, I'm taking over the world. It's just what they do. Because otherwise you do sound like a crazy person being like, yeah, capitalists are just fucking evil and taking over everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does seem like that. I mean, sometimes they do actual conspiracies, but they don't have to most of the time.
Yeah, it's all sanctioned.
He kind of talks about here, they also try to avoid the term working class. They don't really want us to be in solidarity with each other. Instead, they kind of settle on, hey, what about the middle class?
Ugh, the squishiest term around.
What does it do? I mean, it essentially does the kind of class collaboration thing by skipping a step and just saying, no, hey, the classes don't need to collaborate. There just aren't that many classes. There's the middle class. Everyone's on the same team.
He talks about how it applies kind of a virtuous label to these people of like, oh, you work hard, and so like you deserve to be here. And, you know, conversely, keep working hard or you'll end up in the lower class.
Then he gets into this little, I love his little credo response section.
Yeah, just some takedowns.
Yeah, he just kind of smacks some bad responses around. It's like someone says, no, there's no real class divisions in society. Like, it's fine. And he's just like, are you fucking serious, dude?
Hello. Have you not seen this wealth inequality? It's insane.
Yeah. Are you not looking around? Like, what's the deal? So he's just like, no, that's stupid. Okay. Next, social institutions. They're autonomous. They're fair. Don't be a conspiratorial person. Everything's fine.
No. Pretty much all of our institutions are controlled by money. So that doesn't work.
Yeah. The people who control our institutions, the people who control the government, elected officials, appointed officials, business titans.
IMF.
Yeah. These guys are all like the same CEOs wearing different masks. Like, it's the same circle of people. It's the same class of people.
All right. Next, dummy. Sure. Well, the differences between rich and poor people, I mean, if you're naturally smart, you're just going to be rich, That's just some people are rich, some people are poor.
Yeah. That there's an inherent, difference in skills or mindset. And this changes every once in a while. First they say, oh, it's IQ. And then everyone's like, well, that's very racist. And they're like, okay. Then it's mindset. Some people have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Or it's just, everyone has the same 24 hours in a day. They always come up with some different way of saying this is justified. It's the old concept of the natural order, right? Of the mandate of heaven, of the great chain of being. Things are there for a reason.
Don't question it, bud.
And Parenti's like, sorry, the rich, they really do not seem to be naturally superior.
There's some real dumbasses that are rich.
Yeah, and he's like, the game is rigged in their favor, so of course they're winning. They're ruining our planet. They are just fucking everyone over for their own benefit. Like, these guys seem like entitled assholes, not naturally superior people.
because they apply like a moral goodness to these people often. Like, then why are they doing such fucking evil things?
Why don't they end poverty?
Yeah, they're so nice. They have the money for it.
Why don't they put everyone in houses? That doesn't even require you to build houses. You just put them in there. Why don't they feed everyone? Why, and these things are, because they're so virtuous and they're so perfect and everything like this, they should be, Mother Teresa out here, like fixing everything. But they're not, because that's not what they're there for. Again, it goes back to the cause. What is their actual cause? And their actual cause is piling up more money. And they can't pile up more money if no one's willing to go work for them because they have it too comfortable.
ABC theorists. Going back to basics here.
All right. Yeah. We're in kindergarten now. He's going to start dissing on kindergarten teachers here.
Oh, no. Okay. So this is really standing for anything but class.
Yeah. And so these are Marxists or just liberals or what have you who will do all sorts of loops to avoid talking about class. He gives the example of this Stanley Aronowitz guy who's like, when I hear the word class, I just yawn.
Good for you. You sound like you're rich.
I like the footnote, the half-page footnote on the next one.
It's huge. He gives a whole half page to just do a sick burn.
Yeah, because this guy, his friend, this physicist Alan Sokal, fools his way onto Aronowitz's academic journal, who Parenti calls out this journal saying whose articles specialized in, quote, bloated verbiage, pedantic pretensions, and academic one-upmanship.
Oh my God. So his friend just like wrote a fake article for it and just used a bunch of confusing words and got in.
Yeah, and then he like told them about it afterward. He's like, hey, my article doesn't mean anything.
That's fucking postmodernism. That's delicious.
So
love it.
He's basically saying these guys don't have anything behind them. And speaking of postmodernism, that's kind of his next target. Yeah.
Yes, I love that.
What do you think about this?
Okay, I talked about this in part 1 too, but I like this idea of, from my understanding, postmodernism being like a rejection of rationality and like, the rules no longer apply, that kind of thing. And like ideologies don't have relevance. I think if you want to take it out of like art school talk or theory talk, you can kind of think about almost nihilism or like kind of the apathetic way to be cool in like the 80s and 90s was like, well, I'm independent, or like, I don't even care. And
yeah,
like,
or
like
like nothing matters almost, or
kind of
nothing
like that.
has explanations. Because isn't it kind of like anti-narrative too? It's like,
yes.
Okay. Which is, we were just talking about the explanatory like capabilities of Marxism.
We like narratives.
It's the opposite of that, right? It's like saying, no, you can't do that.
It's all random. It's all uncontrollable. Like, let's just make shit because we're here. Like that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That's my interpretation. If I'm way off, actually, I don't care. I don't want someone to explain postmodernism to me. I already went to art school. Please don't put me back. But that's my understanding, is like it is a rejection of what I would call traditional narratives, which is, someone who writes books, not my favorite thing.
Yeah. And he kind of frames this, okay, what does this mean for us? And he says it kind of resembles the same old anti-class theories of both the right and the left of like, hey, there isn't a connection. There's no way to explain this. You can't use class to say, oh, hey, here's why the world is the way it is. Like that is, and in doing that, it's kind of trying to deny us a way of understanding the world and then a way of mobilizing ourselves, to free ourselves from those conditions.
Yeah. And even, the other note here about like humanistic Marxists, I think that's a common complaint against Marxism is like, oh, it's just economics. It doesn't take into account human factors. When we've talked about this, Marxist was a fucking very humanistic thinker. Like he studied history. He studied, was it like social sciences? Like he fucking knew what he was doing.
Yeah. And he came from a tradition of philosophy. And that's why here he's actually kind of calling out what Marxists will sometimes do, and which I've heard before and read on and initially thought like, oh, I guess that kind of makes sense. People are saying it, is that there's kind of a good early Marx and then a bad later Marx. Like, so early Marx is good, nice humanist. And then later Marx is like mean, grumpy economist. Kind of what Parenti argues is that he's more like just kind of growing as a person and a theorist. So he starts from a tradition of Hegelianism.
Yeah, which that was all philosophy, very little economics.
Yeah. That's where he initially kind of draws his inspiration. I mean, he's just doing philosophy initially before he gets kind of sucked into analyzing and explaining capitalism, and that becomes his life project. But Parenti does a good job of saying, like, you can still see in late Marx, like, those philosophical influences. Like, it's not that he just abandons that, but it just kind of like evolves to be not doing philosophy for philosophy's sake, but for trying to explain the economy and sometimes using philosophy as a way of enlightening that.
So he contrasts him to Gramsci? How do you say his name?
I've heard it said Gramsci or Gramsci, either way.
We have gotten requests to read this guy, so now I don't know. Should we read this guy? Let's
this
see.
Guy's good.
Okay. His characterization seems rude. That's why I ask.
I think he's knocking down the rude characterization of it.
Okay.
Because he says, that Gramsci's like, oh, he's not, he's like a different type of Marxist, like a good Marxist.
The Marxist who's safe to bring home to mother is the quote, which I love.
Yeah.
I'm good at charming parents. You can bring me home to mother.
The reason he's saying that is because people are basically trying to whitewash Gramsci and saying like, oh, he's more humanistic, he's less economistic, he's more focused on culture, all this. But what Parenti is right to point out is that Gramsci was a Marxist-Leninist. That he was a member of the Italian Communist Party. He was involved in that directly. Didn't see class and culture as like separate things, but like his big thing is cultural hegemony.
Yes, I've heard of that.
And he basically says like the capitalist state will use culture as a tool of domination. It will shape what it sees, what it dictates is quote unquote common sense. As like the kind of governing, everyone understands. And that's what we've been talking about here, all these myths.
All the myths,
and stuff.
Yeah. So like, how could you read that and view it as not Marxist? That's very Marxist to me.
Yeah, it is. And that's because they haven't read it. I mean, like,
okay. They read the back of the book.
Yeah. Well, I think for a lot of people, yeah. I think that for some people, they've read it and say, well, this focuses more on culture, so that's what I want to do. And just kind of like poo-poo the class part. But for actual Gramsci, it was these were inherently linked. Like culture was
inseparable.
Yeah. I appreciate his setting the record straight, because like he says, Gramsci would be really surprised at this characterization of him.
Like, hey, what the fuck? That was not the point.
Yeah.
That's gonna be me, like, as a ghost in 100 years, like, you missed the point. Read my book again, you fucked up.
I like this next part where he kind of talks about, on page 148, he's talking about like how class can be misapplied, and like, so you start getting into these micro classes of like upper middle and lower middle.
Professional and all that shit.
Yeah, like blue collar.
And we get questions about this.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, is this type of person specifically, they make this much income, like, are they working class? All these things. And he's like, this, class should not just be kind of a weak, weird, fluctuating descriptor of like your income level or the type of work you do.
It's, do you make things or do you have things?
Yeah. He's defending this because people will say, oh, this isn't nuanced enough, whatever. But like, he's saying the reason for that is because it tells you, like, are you working for the capitalist class or are you working for the people who are exploited by them? There is an us versus them nature to capitalism that this microclass thing tries to paper over, tries to disguise.
So is it that, like, acknowledging that professional classes, maybe, or white collar workers, whatever the fuck you want to call them, they live better than other employees, than like maybe service industry people or people who are just like really struggling paycheck to paycheck kind of stuff, but they're still in the same class, and they're really trying to obfuscate that by applying these micro labels. Yes,
yeah, they're still working class, and I mean, there's so many ways to cut it. Like, if you want to get theoretical with it or just want to apply more nuance, it's there. The underlying thing is who's making profit for whom and who's getting that profit, right? That'll tell you, am I getting profit off of other people, or or someone getting profit off of me? Am I exploiting or getting exploited? That's the big division. But then if you want to zoom out, you can say, okay, well, the professional workers are like the managers, right? They're kind of in between a little bit because they're helping the bosses, exploit the workers, but they themselves are getting exploited. You can go global and say, well, we're getting kind of paid off, kind of bribed by the spoils of empire. So we're kind of exploiting, the colonized countries, but we're also being exploited by our bosses. So there's there is nuance there.
There is, for sure. And again, like that underclass, both globally and on a micro level, is used to threaten you too, of like, okay, you can't fuck up here, even though, because like most professionals and managers in that kind of class, or not class, but micro class, is mental work. There is the threat of, well, we could fire you and you have to go do physical work.
Right. Yeah. It's a threat. It's also kind of a shame thing too sometimes.
Definitely.
Like, it's like, oh, why are you complaining? You have it way better than whoever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the important thing to note, the reason why he's saying like it's good to be able to, using Marxism, divide it up into just two groups, is because everybody in that whole cycle of things, except for the capitalist class, everybody would be better off if we got rid of the capitalist class, right? If we freed ourselves from that.
Entirely true.
Then I'm not exploiting the global south anymore, so that's good for them. And I'm not getting exploited from my boss, so that's good for me.
Send me those addresses, Dave and Dan. I'm waiting. You know our email.
So I think that's, a good point he made here.
All right. Everyday class struggle. That's like our motto.
Every day I'm struggling.
No, I mean like the stinger. You don't say it anymore because I record it for the social media thing.
Yeah.
Class struggle is always in session.
Mm-hmm, that's right. So he starts out criticizing the ABC theorists, these guys, because they'll be like, hey, there's like not going to be a workers' revolution anytime soon. Why the fuck are we still talking about class analysis, Marxism, and everything if there's not going to be a revolution tomorrow? Throw out Marxism. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, just because, there's not like an imminent massive change going to happen right immediately, you're not just going to throw it out. Like, right, if you were just like, hey, we're not going to do feminism tomorrow or civil rights tomorrow, are we just going to throw those out? Like, we don't need that.
That's a great point. Yeah, why stop working towards it entirely?
Yeah, he's saying like, you're just going to give up, dude? Like, what? And he says like, the class war is not necessarily going to be the everyday struggle of it. Is not going to be people throwing up barricades and shooting at people, doing real street violence and stuff. It's going to start out, and it's currently taking place with, he says, anti-labor laws, police repression, union busting, all this stuff, dishonest clocking of time, like wage theft. That's huge. Capital is waging a class war on us, and we're, fighting back. We're doing union organizing. We're doing strikes, doing boycotts, doing demonstrations. The class war is being fought. We're losing, but it is being fought.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah, that whole paragraph of what they're doing to crush workers, like, extremely familiar.
Yes. The next section I wanted to see what you thought of, about identity groups.
Yeah, okay. I think this very much lines up with how we see things of, it's great to fight for those issues, but you also should realize how they are connected and show up for each other, right? I mean, he's talking about solidarity here.
Yes, yeah. I think he's saying like, it's only, identity groups and everything are only like weakening the struggle when they are explicitly trying to downplay class interests. Like, if you understand that identity groups that are anti-capitalist, if they understand, hey, this is, these struggles are connected, like you said, with solidarity, then that's good. He says the forces that impose class injustice and economic exploitation are the same ones that propagate racism, sexism, militarism, ecological devastation, homophobia, xenophobia, and the like.
And he goes on to say, like, people may not ever develop that class consciousness, but they're still affected by these things.
Yeah, and when they fight back against the things that are oppressing them, they're fighting back against the same, again, it's the same guy just wearing a different hat. Like, it's the dark side version of the thing where people are blindfolded and feeling the elephant sort of thing. And they're like, oh, it feels like a tree.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's all capitalism. We're just experiencing different parts of it. And he says, class analysis doesn't really deny identity issues, but sees how they are linked together and how we're all affected by capitalism.
Okay, I like this bit. Wealth is an addiction. What do you think about that?
I thought this was interesting because I think I'm too easy on this and saying like, oh, it's not about how one individual reacts really. Yeah. But he's kind of saying like it is corrupting to people and it does like addict them to its accumulation.
Yeah, I think this was interesting because this obviously reminds me of the super wealthy, the Elon Musks, the Bezoses. You hear often of, they have so much money they could never possibly spend it, which is true.
Yeah.
That's a full-time job, is spending that money. It's several lifetimes of job is spending that money. But he argues that like at a certain point, it seems like maybe they're not trying to buy things, but like immortality in the sense of like they're going to be so fucking famous and inflate their ego so much that they're in the cultural consciousness.
They're building pyramids, basically, right?
For sure. And like, it's scary. Like they've moved beyond the dragon sitting on top of a pile of gold. Now it's like they're trying to become a god.
Yeah. He kind of says that capitalism kind of mirrors this in that it is self-devouring. In the name of maximizing power and profits, it has like no end to itself. It will take down its own system. I don't know. It's like a cancer, it's just going to continue to grow until it destroys the host.
Speaking of destroying the host,
yeah.
We've got a Eco-Apocalypse, a class act. This one was fun to read, definitely didn't send me spiraling. But I mean, it talks about how capitalism is inherently a system of production that exploits not only people, but the environment. It views everything as resources, not as earth. It views everything as put input A to make output B,
He had that lovely Engels quote to that effect, talking about how we are a part of nature, right? We belong to it. We exist in its midst. Meanwhile, like you said, capitalism's just out there converting life into death.
And I mean, that's impressive that Engels had that view in, 1876.
Yeah. I mean, he's not getting all the way out to environmentalism or have you, but still like kind of keep in mind or try to ground yourself and say like you were saying earlier with these guys trying to become gods, like we can't do that. Like we're creatures.
There have to be consequences for this. And boy, howdy, are there.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
He gets into some horrifying numbers here. I mean, this was in 96, so I bet it's way worse now.
It's probably worse. The only thing that's like not worse is the ozone layer because...
For some reason, that one got better.
Yeah, well, they fixed it. I mean, they stopped doing the CFCs and everything.
Yeah.
So they just, actually legislated that one
Can
away.
You imagine?
Yeah. The numbers overall probably have only gotten worse besides that one exception. I like his comment on Nixon's quote on Environment Day. What a strange creature is man that he fouls his own nest.
Very good. Very good impression.
Thank you.
But I mean, it gets the idea of, individual responsibility. Putting it all on us. Like, yeah. Oh my gosh.
You need to stop using plastic bags. You need to do this. You need to do that on the individual level. And I mean, like, do it.
For sure, do it.
But like, he says it's of a social magnitude. Like, this is a society-wide, a systemic-wide problem that if you're trying to solve individually, it's not going to work.
Stark reality of the situation is that, like, many people are reconsidering having kids or the number of kids they want because of climate collapse.
Yeah.
And like, meanwhile, you don't see any CEOs tightening their belts.
They are kind of not worried about it. And I thought that was interesting too. He gets into that next is why is the ruling class, why do they not care about the environment? He basically says, well, it's not going to affect them immediately. Like they have more resources to wall themselves off while we, starve in famines or get mutated by toxic waste or get drowned in a flood or literally burn. Like,
I mean, we've had like 2 weeks of thunderstorms in Dallas, which is very unusual. Kyle came home from driving yesterday. He's like, I've never seen rain like that. Like, he had to stop twice to get like tree limbs out of the way so he could get home. And I'm like, dude, this is the new normal.
Yeah, I think that they were saying it's maybe the wettest August that we had, and that was like just in that one short span because we didn't have rain the whole time before that, you know?
Yeah. Like, it's just, I'm very, I mean, honestly freaked out. Like, that is what life is going to be and continue to get worse unless, I mean, something crazy happens.
Yeah, no. And something crazy won't happen unless we, get rid of the bad guy who's doing it, which is the capitalist class. Like, without that class being stopped, without them no longer being in control, this is where they're going to continue to march us.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. He kind of adds some more to, why the ruling class doesn't care about the environment, saying basically they're living in the here or now. They're only focused on immediate gain, right, versus long-term losses for the public and long-run destruction. They don't care about that. But I don't know. I would say, to go back to what you're kind of to tie that back is that they seem increasingly like they are just planning on leaving, or bunkering, or going to space, or they're going to be. They think they're going to be.
They'll
fine.
find a way out. I think they will. They'll find a way to cover their asses and their kids' asses, and that's it.
I think our culture, broadly speaking, to generalize, has like a problem with accepting death.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that the ruling class almost seems in denial of the fact that they will one day die.
I mean, yeah, we just talked about the buying immortality thing. Like, they don't, they consider themselves above that, it feels like. They consider their ability, I mean, they buy into the myth of, like, I am smarter than everyone else.
Yeah, they've internalized that, and they think that they're going to ascend somehow. And so I do think that when they're looking at the devastation of their planet or whatever, they're like, this is fine.
But not me.
Yeah, like, I'll make it out, or I'll tunnel in, and I'll protect my own little group, and that'll be fine. It won't happen to me.
Talking about the cost of ecology, every dollar a company spends on environmental productions is it's $1 less it can spend on earnings. And that's why you see from these companies so many half-ass kind of efforts of, they're willing to, recognize an environmental issue and maybe like post about it or just do something really toothless, but they're not actually going to like change their ways.
Yeah, no, that cuts into their profits. And again, that's the main thing. This whole system, it's repeated because it bears repeating, is this whole system is geared toward profit. It's not geared toward the environment. It's not geared to you living a good life. It does not care. That doesn't factor into the calculations one bit.
Not at all. And except for PR, and even then it's like, what is the bare minimum we could do?
Yeah. If you want a system that genuinely is trying to work for your needs, you got to jump on board with the communists, with the socialists, or with the anarchists.
Again, the blaming of the individual, or even the culture, the talk about the car culture, saying, America is set up to be a car country, and, you can blame that on like individual responsibility, but like, you don't have a choice here.
Yeah.
Like, God, I live in Dallas. There's no fucking way. Like, no. Nothing
is walkable. Cities are built for cars. The spaces in between are built for cars. Everything is car dependent.
And why is that?
Again, because of profits, because they set it up.
Because the car companies.
It's crazy.
I don't know. The ending to me felt a little bit abrupt, but in a way, this is like a perfect ending because, it's such a prevalent crisis. But the conclusion of, environmentalism kind of just requires communism. It requires a form of planned production. Like, you can't have this, what Marx calls the anarchy of production. You can't have that when you're actually trying to like plan for your future.
He says it's profoundly subversive of capitalism. Like, because you're right. What are you going to do? How are these different competing firms somehow going to coordinate to save the planet? They're not.
They're not, because they know every one of them is trying to undercut the other one. And that means, well, fuck, what goes out the window first? Wages and the environment.
And geopolitically, it works the same too, because you'll still have this, the right wing and whatever. They'll say, well, we don't want to do environmental actions and stuff, legislation, because what if China doesn't do it? What if India doesn't do it?
I mean, while Pakistan's underwater.
Yeah, and the reason that they seem to have the same stance as the CEOs and the businesses and everything is because they're the same people. That government works for them. To change it, you've got to get rid of the capitalist class being in charge. I mean, they've got to be dispossessed of what they've got. And we've got to put the people in charge and coordinate. I mean, a massive scale reorganization of everything.
If it sounds overwhelming, it's because it is. But I mean, you can't just get rid of, the political powers. Like, you can vote in as many communists as you want, but they're going to come to blows with those corporations at one point or another.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. It does kind of feel like a rushed ending, but I do like his parallel of, hey, in a lot of ways, this is the big front of the class conflict now.
I think so. I truly, I think I said this last episode, that's my prediction. I think climate collapse is going to, I think that's our best chance towards revolution.
Because it unifies everybody,
except for those few rich people in their bunkers.
Yeah, and there's no clear way to put it. Like, we literally all will suffer the same fate. I guess different horrors will be visited upon us in different locations, but it's all going to suck. And only the wealthy will be able to somewhat / completely escape it. But I definitely liked his last lines. We need an informed and mobilized citizenry. I like that it's not just a platitude of informed, because yes, okay, getting informed is great. But you also, need to be out there, need to be doing things. He says the people are our best hope, and the struggle continues throughout history.
I love that. For me, this is a 5-star.
5-star, 10 out of 10, would read again. I did read again. I read this twice.
Yeah, I've read it twice now, too.
And it's short. I love that. It's easy to read, and I'm not a fast reader, so dope book. Totally good.
Very dope. Would recommend for your already left friends, probably. Yeah, it's a good one.
Next week, we're going to be a little chiliastic, but in the stupid definition that we gave, not the real one. We're going to be chill.
Yes, we're just going to shoot the shit next week. Gives us a chance to have time to research from future episodes, and y'all seem to like them. So yeah, Shooting the Shit Volume 3 coming your way.
Nice. Do they? Those are popular episodes?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't checked the numbers, but we've gotten good feedback on them in comments and stuff.
Ah, the vibes are good. Okay, cool.
The vibes are
good. Everything is vibes now.
All vibes based.
All right.
Vibes based economy.
That's what we're working toward, guys. If you want to, overthrow the evils of capitalism, you got to replace it with a vibes based economy. Okay,
that is true though. The intent thing was you put the people at the center of your goal. That's pretty vibe. That's a vibe.
Yeah, that's it's giving people at the center vibes.
Caring for the people vibes. Love it. All right. Talk to y'all next week.
See ya.
Bye. Hey there, comrades. Just jumping in to remind you of all of our social media. We are on Twitter at teachcommunism, Instagram at teachmecommunism. You can shoot us an email. That's teachmecommunism@gmail.com. Any of those places are good to send us an episode suggestion or a question, anything you think would be useful feedback for us, or just your admiration. If you want to admire us in a public manner, and you should, you can go to Apple Podcasts to give us a review. It is the best way to help people find the show. Love when people rate and review us. Please do both. We are also on YouTube, if that's how you prefer to listen to podcasts, or if you know someone that's the only way they'll listen to podcasts, send them to our page. And we have a Patreon. For $5 a month, you get access to our notes for each week's episode, including the backlog of notes, which is a very handy resource for up-and-coming commies. And at the end of the year, all of the funds from Patreon will be given to local mutual aid in the DFW area. So, ain't going to line our pockets. Finally, we have merch. Check us out at TeePublic. You can find shirts, and I believe also stickers and magnets and all kinds of fun stuff with catchphrases from the show or episode art, stuff like that. The link to that store is in the show notes, so check that out. Okay, that's all the internet. Join us next time for another episode of Teach Me Communism, where the class struggle is always in session. Bye, y'all.